Healing, hope, and the pursuit of happiness are at the core of our national promise. But for many facing trauma, that promise feels out of reach. Could psychedelics be part of the solution? Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age. My guest is Sally Roberts, combat veteran, elite athlete, founder of Wrestle Like, and now an ambassador for the Americans for Ibogaine Initiative. Sally is on a mission to ensure no one who has faced trauma is left behind. Today, she joins us to share her personal experiences, the science and promise of psychedelics in trauma recovery, and the path toward legal and ethical access in the U.S. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health. Well, Sally, welcome back to the Aging Well podcast. In your last visit, we focused on your role as founder of the Wrestle Like Foundation and the importance of sports participation, particularly wrestling for girls. And we know that's only part of your story. So how did your journey from wrestling to military service bring you into advocacy for healing and trauma?
All great questions, and thank you for having me. My journey was really dynamic. I had founded Wrestle Like a Girl. I was living in DC. I felt like from the outside looking in, many thought I had the world at my fingertips. But I would look in the mirror and I would say, oh my gosh, I am matchsticks duct taped together, sitting dangerously close to kerosene, and I have built this stack of cards, this empire on my shoulders, and I don't have a solid foundation. And I was working with a business coach who was like, hey, I get it. You don't have a solid foundation. Let's work with your 5Fs: faith, family, fitness, friends, finances. I was like, okay. So I created a business plan for that on a scale of 1 to 10. Where am I at? If I'm not at a 10, how do I get there? And I started really becoming methodical because I wanted the business to succeed. And at a certain point, I had got those 5Fs. I had everything I wanted on a scale of 1 to 10. I was at full 10s. I didn't understand what was missing. And I was also at that point in time talking to people, and I was having a conversation saying, how do you know who you are? And they would look at me and say, I'm just so-and-so. I just have always known that. I'm like, you've always known that? I don't, like, do you know who you are? And I'm like, I don't know who I am. Like, I don't know how you know. And what I didn't realize was happening was that there was something that wasn't right within me. I'm actually telling a lot of people, but because I don't have the language, I'm just saying, I don't really feel good. Something's not right. And December 23, actually August 27th, I made a decision based off of my historical trauma that changed the trajectory of my life. And it was a decision based out of fear. It was a decision based out of closeness. It was a decision based out of, I don't think I'm worthy. And I changed my environment. And when I was in DC, having just now made this tremendous decision that was based out of fear and unworthiness and all of those negative feelings that we feel, someone said, hey, you know what? Like, you're not okay. It's okay to not be okay, but you got to go get help. And I went to my first psychedelic experience, and I knew that I didn't feel good. I knew I didn't have the language to communicate how I didn't feel. I couldn't even articulate to people why that incident that happened on August 27th, 2023 was so profound for me. And so when I was there, there was so much that I had to learn and unlearn. And actually, it is important to note that my learning came from my unlearning. And when I stood at this retreat and it was overlooking some water, and I raised my hands above my head and I just envisioned myself swan diving into the ocean before I went and did my first psychedelic experience, because what I wanted was the water to come through and cleanse me and touch my cells and touch my soul and really help me figure out, like, who is Sally? And my first psychedelic experience was very tricky. I didn't understand it. I thought there was going to be some sort of gift that came. what came for me was a lot of grief and a lot of anger and a lot of sadness. And I'm talking to other people in my cohort and they're like, I'm having the best time of my life. I'm like, you're having the best time. And this is not my best time. I think this ranks upon one of my most challenging experiences. And as I started to get a voice to talk about my emotions, there was there was something there that was stopping my truth from speaking, and so it all got sort of stuck in my throat. And the unraveling of that was that I came out of that experience. I couldn't tell you which way was up. I wanted to believe what was good, but I didn't have any bearing for it. I couldn't really tell you about emotions. They still didn't make sense to me. It was all very convoluted. And I found my way to a therapist. I did a lot of things. I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I did dialectical behavioral therapy. I went and did a whole series of ketamine. None of that was helping. I was in complete despair, and I found myself talking to a therapist who's not based in the United States, and that was important to me because I wanted them to be able to practice both Western therapy and also ancient medicine or plant medicine, and I needed them to weave those worlds together because something wasn't right, and I needed someone far smarter than me to help me. And really, I needed them to hold my hand and walk with me on this journey. And when I showed up to her, she said, I'm so glad you're here. One, it shouldn't be like this. For some people, it does get much, much worse before it gets much better. You're one of the minority of people it got much worse for. And two, she said, I want you to know that you're not alone. And I'm so glad you called me. And I wish we would have gotten contact sooner because I could have helped you through this. And the very first thing, and I show up and I'm telling you what, Jeff, I'm like painfully honest with myself and taking far more responsibility than I should for a lot of things. So I show up and I said, okay, well, now that we've established this therapeutic rapport, I want to tell you that here's what I think's wrong. And I like rolled out. I was on WebMD. I'm like, I'm psychotic. I'm schizophrenic. I have bipolar disorder. And I was just like rolling down all these things. And she said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Before we go down the pathway of self-diagnoses, let's start talking about our emotions. And I'm like, emotions? I don't talk about emotions. I don't feel emotion. Like I just never have. I've been built this way that I don't feel emotion. So this was this very cool learning experience now of me walking around with the emotion wheel and trying to figure out what am I feeling and like trying to get it aligned with this emotion wheel. And I would have the emotion wheel and I would put it up to people's faces and I'm like, I think you're angry right now. Do you agree with that? And I turned it into this really interesting, fun game of like, I have to understand the language of emotion. I have to be able to get it aligned with me. I have to get it aligned with what society says is appropriate. And there was just this incredible learning, like the person who is Sally, there was a reason I didn't know who it was. Like I was so detached. And she said, hey, you might want to consider Ibogaine. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm open for it. And then I talked to another friend that was from 10th Group Special Forces. And he was like, I've been your friend for a long time. When you came out of psilocybin, that was not the way it should have been. I 100% encourage you and support you going and doing Ibogaine. He was like, that did everything they said it would do and more. And I was just like, the more this went on, the more grief and despair that I was carrying. And I just had so much sorrow. And I didn't know what it was tied to. I couldn't have pinpointed it. So I went and did Ibogaine, and that was at Ambio Life. I showed up there and I was 110 pounds. I was pale. I was gaunt. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. When I was going to sleep at night, I would have these nightmares that would wake me up. I was waking up in night sweats. I couldn't work out. Like if I worked out, it was like 2 or 3 days in a row. And then I was exhausted and I needed a full week to recover. And I'm just like, what the heck? So I go to the medicine. And I really am there to ask the medicine 2 questions. You can ask the medicine anything, like what's the history of the universe? Are aliens real? I don't know what people ask the medicine. I didn't care what they wanted to know. I just was there for me. I wanted to know, who am I and what the hell am I doing here? Like I don't know who I am. And I'm telling everybody I don't know who I am. So I go into the medicine. and it starts to kick in. And actually, I should share that before the medicine kicked in, I was laying on this little cot, and I had, and it's the room, the whole cohort's down there, and I have someone sitting next to me who's become a very dear friend. His name's Jimmy, and Jimmy is a Ranger Battalion guy, and he's a barrel-chested freedom fighter, and he's very much this positive, gregarious, outgoing individual. I'm laying next to him, and I serenade everyone into the medicine with my sobs, because I am now fully convinced. I've been through a psilocybin experience. I've been through so many different therapies. I've been through ketamine. Nothing's working. I'm beyond hope. This is where I find out that it works for everyone but me. So I'm in this medicine. I'm sobbing, and one of the facilitators comes over and is like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just crying because I know the medicine's not going to work, and it's going to be me that has to come out of this." So the medicine kicks in, and I'm like, "Ooh." Like I hear some buzzing, and it's like there are these bees, and they land on the back of my head, and they just start giving me this brain massage. Every place that I've had a concussion, every place that I've had trauma or some sort of like back blast where there was this reverberation, like the medicine found it and just started. I felt like he was like munching it. Like Pac-Man, and it was eating it. And I know enough, being a business owner, that when you have hourly workers working, you want to give them praise. And so I stepped back and I was like, I don't know what my role is here, but I'm going to clap and I'm going to tell them thank you because I can feel it. It feels good. Like my headaches are going away. Like it was so beautiful, and I wanted to encourage them, and I didn't want to be in their way. And at a certain point, God comes down, and I felt very much that I wasn't raised with motherly love or fatherly love. We weren't raised with religion. We weren't raised with faith. Like I made a decision very early on, because I can't feel emotions. I'm going to use my powers for good and not evil. And I always had a very hard time discerning what is good and what is evil. And so I just sort of evolved my own sort of theories and concepts as I went through life. And so here comes God floating down, and I'm like, huh, you're real? Like, where have you been? And there's this conversation that evolves. And it's like, I had all these things that I could do. And God was talking to me like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I became very much a CEO. And I said, listen, I don't know how much time I have with you, so we have to make best use of this. I was like, one, who am I? And I now am transported on this spaceship, and I'm looking out the front, and there's no one else on the spaceship. And I can see out through the glass, this vantage point, the universe. And I'm like, wow, that's incredible. Let's go back to the question, God, who am I? And out of the corner of my eye, I see this beautiful marble sculpture, and it's floating, and it starts to turn, and it turns to the face up. And I realize it's my head. And I'm like, I'm Sally? Oh shit! No one told me that I was Sally. And so as this is happening, and God is having a conversation with me, the medicine is going on my brain, and I realize that there's some sort of disconnect that had happened in my life. I didn't know who I was. And so the medicine was helping to repair damage. And God and I were having this conversation, and it was like I was almost speaking to a doctor, but I was actually telling him what was wrong. And so they're able to go in there and start working on my brain. And I'm like, okay, so got it. If I'm Sally, then what I need to know is who's been driving this ship, because I didn't know I was Sally. So that meant there was someone here that's been driving the ship, and I need to figure out who that person was. And so I get transported. I ask God, like, where is she? Where's the person that's been driving this ship? And God transports me instantaneously. I'm in front of this black door. And I'm like, oh, I know exactly where I'm at. When I was 5 years old, I was playing in the front yard by myself. Someone came by, asked me for candy. I said I wanted it. He grabbed me by the wrist, put his hand over my mouth, abducted me, took me into this boiler room at an apartment complex, and sexually assaulted me. He raped me. And when the police came and pulled me out of this room that I was in, the boiler room, I realized they only pulled out my body. My spirit was still in that boiler room. So I'm standing in front of this black door, and on the other side of this door is a pedophile that just raped me, and a 5-year-old little girl that's crumpled up into a floor like and I knew how she was. So I had this moment of thinking, what do I do? Do I go in and I just absolutely annihilate the pedophile, or do I go in and do hostage rescue and get my little 5-year-old spirit out of this room? And I was going through all these scenarios, right? Because I've raised myself to be very protective of kids and of women. And now I realize, like, everything that I've done in my life has prepared me for this very specific moment. And as I'm really having to play the game of violence or love, God comes and I can feel him behind me, like this warm golden glow. And I'm like, I'm so glad you have my back. How about this? I'm going to go do hostage rescue and get Sally. I want you to take care of the pedophile. And God's like, you got it. Like, so I kick open this door and I go running into Sally, that is this crumpled mess on the floor, and I pick her up, and God has sent over the worker bees, and they are dismantling that black shape of a pedophile that has been causing me nightmares for 39 years. And as he's doing that, I walk out with Sally. I step over the threshold from the broiler room into the light, and I'm holding this broken body. And as we start floating up into the heavens, I hold this little girl up, this little Sally, like Simba. And the light from God touches her. She starts at the middle of her belly, and it goes from her head all the way to her legs. She turns this beautiful golden, and it was like she just got revitalized in front of my eyes. And when she had become totally golden, this golden had started to go down my arms, and it came until it hit my chest, and I could feel my heart beating. And I was like, oh shit, that's what love feels like? I had no idea. And I could feel love. And it was that I had found my spirit, my fractured spirit from this incident that happened when I was 5 years old that no one remembered and no one talked about. And we just sort of thought it was all okay and it was going to go under the rug. But it was very much something that I had to go and reconcile as an adult. So I sat through that medicine, and God said, hey, now that you've got Sally, you can go do whatever you want. Like, there's this menagerie of things that we can explore together. And I said, God, you have to understand, no one has ever wanted this girl. She's always taken second place. She's never come in first. She's never been chosen. I said, if I get to pick anything I want to do, I want to spend the next 12 hours loving on this human who has been so desperate to be loved and to be wanted and to be held and to be nourished. And he honored that. For the next 12 hours, I was with my inner child, this 5-year-old Sally, who is really cool. I absolutely love her. She's really funny, really brave, and she did exactly what I said, which was she stayed hidden until I told her I would come back and find her and not to come out for anyone else but me. And so I spent the next 12 hours in just this complete rapture. And when the medicine wore off and I opened my eyes, I sat up and I realized I had gone into that medicine and as a 90-year-old woman that was begging for a redo because I wasn't married, I didn't have kids, I missed out on all that life was supposed to be. I built this business, but it was really just to serve others, and it wasn't really serving me. And I rolled forward, and I woke up as a 45-year-old woman who is single and sovereign, has full agency, has financial security, and I get to be the maker of my own life and my own vision and my own destiny. And when I walked upstairs, I hit the ground running because I had been given a second chance.
Wow. I was somewhere between tears and joy listening to that story. And it so moves me, and I don't even know where to go from it. This is why I really want to get on the platform of advocating for PAT, because I think, that story just shows the depth of healing that can come through these practices. And if you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing, and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast. One question I want to ask you, so before the experience with Ibogaine, you tried psilocybin. Was that a kind of structured therapeutic session, or was it just kind of a retreat where you just kind of everybody took their medicine and you were more or less on your own to deal with what the medicine brought you?
Good question. I have to share that I was so fractured and broken and disoriented when I went. What I thought I was going to do and what I ended up doing were different. It was a retreat, and it does help 4 to 6 people that go. But there's usually that 1 to 2 people. I was talking to the person that organized the retreat. She said there's usually 1 to 2 people that get angry at me because they don't do the work. And I was like, shit, I don't know what the work is. Like, and I was understanding now as I've evolved through this process, I had a spiritual fracture. I could have done all of that work, but none of it was making a difference. It was like my wheels were spinning in the mud because what I had to resolve was that my spirit had broken away and was hiding because I told it to, and I didn't know how to bring it back. I actually needed to figure out how to do soul retrieval. And I would have thought this was all completely woo-woo had I not experienced it. And in fact, I will also say that when I came out of Ibogaine, we were at Ambia Life in Mexico, in Tijuana. So when I got to San Diego, I picked up the phone and I called my mom and I said, Mom, I found Sally. And she said, where was she? And I said, she was in a broiler room. And it got really quiet on the other end. And she said, they told me you would never remember. And I said, I didn't remember, but I never forgot. And that opened up a conversation about the abduction and what that happened to our family and how that had second, third order effects. That here I am. At that point, I was 39 years later. I was 44 years old. And this had been a secret that my family knew about that affected my mom. She didn't know how to support me. So she told me, no one's going to help you. No one's going to save you. You have to fight your way out. My brother and I had to get put into a witness protection program until the pedophile could get found, and understanding that he was calling my mom and harassing her, saying he was going to find me and steal me again. And so there was so much fear around this. So when I was able to come out as a sovereign individual with agency and start having these conversations with my family, there was a lot of shame that got released that was unnecessarily held because it wasn't anyone's fault but that pedophile. And it allowed my family to start healing. So now when I look at this, the integration piece, before it was just, I don't know who I am. Now that I know who I am, it's like, how do I integrate that into the world? And I think if I would have done Ibogaine before psilocybin, or soul retrieval before psilocybin, if I would have understood what the problem was before I went in, it would have probably had a much different outcome. It's that the world was so new to me. I had no idea. I didn't know that I had this Pandora's box of secrets, and it all had to start getting unraveled. And actually, I'll share with you. So I came back. I work in DC. I live and work in DC. And I came back, and after you go through an experience like that, like you feel lighter, you feel more joy, you can see the hope and the possibilities. And I walked into this space in Washington, D.C., and I have a very strong relationship with the female diplomatic corps that exists in DC. And I had 3 female ambassadors coming up and start talking to me. And as it unfolded, I got a job opportunity that many would say was like the job of a lifetime. But here I am, like, as a sovereign individual. And I'm like, I don't know. Is this the job of a lifetime? Like, is this abundance and should I receive it? Or is this just another thing and maybe it's not meant for me? I didn't know how to answer the question. So I actually went back down to Mexico. And also when I'm in DC, I was getting stomach aches. So I went back down to Mexico and I was really going to go sit with the medicine. I went and I had to do 2 things. One, I didn't know how to make a decision. And 2, when I thought of psilocybin, I had fear because the first time I did psilocybin, it was such a horrific experience for me. I'm glad when people have a great experience. That wasn't mine. That I had to confront that. And I'm known, like my personality is that I run towards the sound of gunfire. And when there's a punch thrown, I want to lean into it and absorb it with my face. So like, I'm fine with that. And so it wasn't that the medicine was calling me, it was that I was calling the medicine out. And I wanted it to know that whatever happened the first time, I had to do a redo. So I went back down and I curated my own experience and I pulled people that I could feel safe with now that I understand the magnitude of the trauma that I was carrying. And I went in really to ask this question: should I take this job or not? And this was the conversation that I needed to have with God. And this very surreal thing happened. I went to him and said, "Here's my challenge. I got this job opportunity. It seems great." And when I came out of the jungle 3 days later, I didn't know if I should take the job or not. What the medicine did was that it was like, hey, you've already found your spirit. Now we need to get your head and your heart connected so you know how a normal human being makes decisions. And I was like, a normal human being makes it like this is what people know, like this is what it feels like to be human, to have your soul attached to you, to be able to have your head working, your concussions have been resolved, your heart is working, everything's working together, and now you start to move forward. I mean, for me to get there, it's taken over a year and a half. And it has been intensive trauma. And I would say, too, after I did the Ibogaine, the work that I did after psilocybin, the cognitive behavioral therapy, the dialectical behavioral therapy, the trauma therapy, now all that started to sink in and permeate. I was like, well, now it makes sense because now I have a soul. Like it was always there, but she was hiding. And so for me, it has been really learning how to be a human that could feel emotions. I had to learn love. I had to learn how to get along with other people. I now have empathy. I used to laugh. It's not particularly funny now, but I used to laugh and say, I don't have emotions. I don't feel emotions. I can't feel empathy. And because I made my powers, I made that decision to use my powers for good and not evil. That meant that I'm wrestling. That meant that I'm in the military. That means that I do international disaster work. I mean, I would put myself in these scenarios where there was very hard things being felt and I couldn't feel it so I could go out there and do good work. But it turns out all that good work was just getting packed trauma after trauma after trauma. And so I was carrying a lot. It's taken me a year and a half, almost 2 years. And I would tell you that this is going to be a lifelong journey. And because of the nature of the lifelong journey that I'm on, I had the good fortune of joining Americans for Ibogaine, and there's two reasons why I said yes. One is because I am a patriot. I love my country so very much. I represented the United States as an athlete, as a service member, and even as an athlete. Sometimes you would go through and you would go on those international trips, and you would get a T-shirt from an athlete from another country, or they'd give you a singlet. They'd be the singlet exchange. I am such a patriot that I couldn't allow myself to wear a singlet from another country because all I could ever wear was American. So when it was Americans for Ibogaine, that piqued my interest. And two, the fact that it was Ibogaine, because I had tried so many other things and it brought me despair. And when I was in Ibogaine, that particular substance, that particular plant medicine, it brought me to God. He told me that I was loved. He told me that I was worthy and that I had a purpose on this world, on this earth. And it was the first time that he's told me that. And I believed him, and I see it and I feel it every day.
So I want to be clear to all our viewers and listeners. What we're talking about here is a therapeutical practice. We're not talking about recreational use of any of these plant medicines. And that there has to be a certain level of caution in terms of how you approach it. Because like you said, if you went into just simply using psilocybin and the wrong dose and in the wrong crowd and the wrong environment, it could have been very damaging to you.
Yeah.
But by using the right medication, the right treatments, and the right environment, it will be life changing.
That's right. And I think with Ibogaine, unless your idea of a fun party state is being in a semi paralysis, it's not fun. I laid there completely still for 12 hours in my own head, in my own thoughts. I don't know how much I moved because I was also aware that the medicine was running through me, and I didn't want to have to make any movements that was going to use medicine and direct it away from the healing. And so I was laying there totally compliant and encouraging this medicine on. It is the farthest thing from a party I've ever had, but it did leave me very joyful.
So you've kind of already talked about what kind of drew you to becoming an ambassador for Americans for Ibogaine. What is your role, and how do you see your background contributing uniquely to this movement?
My role at Americans for Ibogaine is to continue to spread the message and spread the word about how incredibly healing psychedelics can be for those that have experienced trauma, whether it's from the military, whether it's from childhood, whether it's from being an athlete and getting concussions. Like, we all have trauma. We all do need to deal with it. As an athlete, I thought that concussions, it was just, as a wrestler, concussions, that's what happens. I chose to wrestle Iowa style. What does that mean? That means I led with my head. I didn't care if I got headbutted. My forehead would just be completely torn up at the end of a wrestling tournament. I would have black eyes. I would have blood coming out of my nose. And I felt so victorious for that look of a warrior. There's another way you can wrestle, which is the Penn State style. It's really classy. It's really graceful. There's a lot of technique. I couldn't even tell you what that looks like because I never did it. And so I would say too, like, being able to tell people that there's these things that we go through in life, childhood trauma, concussions, military experience. Everyone is worthy of being healed. And if you've tried everything else, but you haven't tried Ibogaine, I would really consider you to do it. And I agree with you. There's because of the nature of the work. And I think for me, it's this blend of Western medicine and plant medicine, which I refer to as ancient medicine. You have to be able to bridge those worlds together. And there's still tends to be a disconnect between what the way the Western world does it and where everyone else is. Like, our American exceptionalism is so strong. I do love that. Americans for Ibogaine are American exceptionalism, but also there's the practices that have come from the indigenous people, that they have this historical knowledge. I mean, we have 9,000 years of traditional Chinese medicine, and we're only now learning how to bridge those two worlds. There's going to be the first hospital of its kind in Hong Kong that bridges Western and Eastern Chinese medicine. So there is hope and possibility for all of this, and it's going to be through recognizing that it is a very sacred medicine. There's a lot of ceremony that goes with it. I think even from the person that gives you the medicine, like, that is an act of love because they want you to heal. And if their hands aren't clean, or their heart's not clean, or their spirit's not clean, or if there's any ill intention, that gets passed through the medicine. I would never go do any psychedelic experience knowing what I know now about how important and profound the medicine is with anybody that is not qualified to deal with trauma, because I'm showing up in a good faith effort to offload. I want to make sure that the other person is showing up in a good faith effort to help me deliver it back into the earth, back into the universe. It can get recycled up into the heavens and whatever happens to it after that. But I get to be a vessel that now walks with a pure heart, a pure spirit, a pure soul, and I can go out and do good work in this world.
So let's talk about Ibogaine specifically. Can you explain in kind of accessible terms what it is, how it acts in the brain, and how it differs from other psychedelics such as psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, and you've tried ketamine as well, so you have a little bit of experience there. And I also want to underscore for individuals, you are trained in psychology too. You're not just, a wrestler that, went on a Ibogaine trip, right? You know what you're talking about here.
Somewhat. I would actually push back and say, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm learning as I go. So okay. I can say that I have my undergrad degree is from the University of Colorado, College Springs, and it was in psychology with an emphasis in trauma. And my senior thesis was exploring, can we use sports to help children overcome traumatic events and build self-efficacy? And as I was continuing to go on, I was wrestling and I had tremendous anxiety, to the point that I actually registered and got my master's degree in sports and performance psychology. It wasn't to help other people. It was to help me because I wanted to win. I was very focused on myself. So the world of psychedelics has been very new to me. It's been very eye-opening. And it occurred when the universe was really opened its doors and I stepped forward. I would say There's people far smarter than me that can talk about ibogaine. I can tell you that it comes from the iboga plant that's grown in Gabon, Africa. There is a tremendous ceremony around it. It's the Bwiti tribe that honors that medicine, that has worked with it for generations. And it is a medicine where there's still understanding how and why it does what it does. There's a lot of researchers. There's a great researcher that comes out of Stanford that talks about it. And one of the pieces that I found interesting, and this was just to lay the groundwork, is that there's been such headwinds towards getting plant medicine approved for use in the Western world. And he gave this example of this not the first time it's happened. When we had ships that were traveling from Europe over to the United States, like Christopher Columbus, during that time frame, they were running into scurvy. And they found that with the invitation and with providing citrus fruit, that helped negate it. And it took over 100 years to get citrus fruit approved to be able to circumvent scurvy, which we now know is like a very normal thing. Like, yeah, just eat an orange. And so as I take that example and I look at ibogaine, I don't have the specifics of why it does what it does. It's very special. I'm still working on learning it and evolving it. It was truly magical. And it wasn't just magical for me. I was in there with a cohort with 5 other people. One of the individuals was a 23-year-old kid that came from the upper boreal forest in Canada, who was from a Mennonite community, and he got excommunicated for some reason. And so he was now without home. There was another woman in my cohort who was 72 years old, and she drank a bottle of Chardonnay a day for the last 32 years. And there was another gentleman in my cohort that was 61 years old that had used crack cocaine for 21 years. And there was, of course, there was a Ranger Battalion gentleman who had experienced a lot of heavy, heavy things in life. And there was another gentleman there that was married and had a daughter and was really struggling with figuring out how to communicate appropriately. We all went into that medicine and we all came out. And we looked around and said, whatever that was amazing, because every single one of us came out okay, if not better than okay. We all still stay in communication and contact. Every individual that was in our cohort continues and maintains their sobriety. They continue and maintain their practices. The gift that was given from having that mental, spiritual, emotional reset was in fact profound. And I'm going to continue to understand why it does what it does, but the research is continuing to evolve. And so we can say that it works, and we're continuing to figure out the why.
So can you elaborate a little bit on, what is the current state of research evidence, particularly clinical evidence for psychedelics?
I couldn't tell you. I'm totally not involved in the academic or psychedelic space. They're like, hey, will you come and talk on this panel? I'm like, you got it. I can certainly tell my story, but I cannot tell you at all about academia. My job that I live and work in every day is I'm a sports diplomat for the Trump administration. So I just came back from Jordan. I just spent 2 weeks over there teaching girls wrestling and sports and performance psychology, breathwork, meditation, visualization. And I'm able to do that work because of my experience with Ibogaine. And I certainly let the experts lead in what makes them happy. And what makes me happy is to go over here and continue doing the work of Wrestle Like a Girl, using sport as a tool for diplomacy and empowerment.
Well, that's okay, because we're planning on trying to get, some of the more scientific minds on there to talk about what where the research is, how this all happens at a physiological level and things like that. But I think for most of our listeners and viewers, it's much more important for them, not so much to understand the physiology or the, neurology of how it works, but just the fact that it works and how it changes lives. And so, already I've had chills throughout this conversation, just, having known you. I'm trying to think how many years I've known you. We still haven't met in person.
Yet.
It took me a while to get to meet Sandy in person, but, I've known you, and honestly, I could tell you, we've had conversations before, and there's a different Sally in front of me. I can see it. I can feel it. And there's just a certain joy. And, as I listened to your story, I mean, I did not know that depth of your past. I mean, I knew you
I
had a
didn't
hard
either.
childhood, and, just the revelation of that, it was like, a part of me wanted to cry, but there's a part of me that's just like so joyful to kind of see all of that released from you and seeing really a new person in front of me. I mean, it's night and day. And that seems like a really almost a harsh statement to say night and day, because anybody that has seen you before, it's not that distinct of a difference, but it's a subtle enough, really strong difference that you can see that you're a new person. And it gives me joy, and it gives me so much hope for so many people that have gone through traumatic experiences. And so I'm just so excited to have you on here and having you sharing this story, because this is probably one of the deepest conversations we have had on this podcast. And I hope people really take away from it how beneficial this therapy can be for people who are broken. And we have a lot of breaks in this country right now.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. And I think I'm really grateful that this pathway has opened up. I would even say, as I look back, because my first psychedelic experience, I didn't know what I was walking into. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was going. There was just a lot of unknowns. I'm even grateful for that experience because as I know who I am, and I do at the very core of me feel like I'm a warrior, and I have chosen a lineage so that I could be a warrior. And I was sitting back and thinking, would I have appreciated my psychedelic journey if I would have gone to the first one? It worked amazing. And I was like, ooh, now I'm off and I'm doing something else. Like, I don't know if it would have hit me with the same intensity. For my story to have evolved the way that it did, with my first psychedelic experience being really, really hard, and then being able to go to Ibogaine and have that, it was like, and have the effectiveness hit me. I mean, I went to Ibogaine in November 2024, and I am still walking around without headaches. I'm completely sober. I didn't have substance abuse issues, but I was using Adderall because my ADD was so out of control. I mean, if you took me as an athlete, I was moving all the time, and now I'm sitting in a chair and my body is wiggling, and that's part of like the energy that needed to come out. So my headaches have gone away. My brain has more clarity. I have sobriety. I don't drink alcohol. I have no desire to drink alcohol. It can be put in front of me. I just don't care. The tinnitus in my ears has stopped ringing. I had light sensitivity from concussions. I would always wear those lights that, Dave Asprey would be talking about, the sunglasses that he would be talking about to block the blue light. And I'm like, how many pairs do you need in order for this to work? Right? Like I was doing it all, like the wrestler mentality. If a little is good, more is better. And to be able to just walk around this earth as just a human that can feel things, man, that's a gift. And it's a gift because we have the ability to speak life into other people and affect them in a way that there is so much brokenness. The way that the light shines through the dark is by reaching out when people don't have the ability to reach in.
that's deep. Um, yeah, this is like kind of my other podcast with We Have a Spiritual Problem, where I kind of dive into some deep topics, and I end up getting moments where it's just like, I got to pause and absorb that and comprehend that. And so for the listeners, when I pause, know that it's just, I'm trying to put this all together spiritually, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially. And so to kind of move on to, we've talked about all these benefits, but there's going to be people like, yeah, but that stuff's dangerous. People shouldn't be doing it. I've heard of people having bad trips. What are some of the risks or safety concerns, cardiovascular effects, psychological challenges that come with psychedelic therapies, and how should those be addressed?
I think there's a lot of risks and there's a lot of challenges. I mean, first off, you have to know that you're going to be crossing over that threshold to enter into a space, and something's going to happen, but what? And you have to be willing to let life unfold. The thing that I think is the most important is that what I do now, before I say yes to any experience, I get on the phone with the person that's hosting it. I want to know who they are, how long they've done it, what has been their most challenging experience to navigate. Like if and and I want to know, I want to build a rapport with them. I didn't do that the first time. I signed up for an experience. I thought, okay, let's go. And I didn't do the necessary background check. Historically, you probably don't need to, but if you've come with the level of trauma that I have, then it is important, because you need to know that you're going to a place, or at least I need to know, I'm going to a place that's trauma informed. You don't have to be a trauma expert, but you at least have to be informed so that you don't say something that flares something that now opens up a whole nother can of worms that you weren't prepared to deal with in that particular moment. And so I think a lot of it too is just taking ownership of your life, taking ownership of how you want to move forward, even in, with cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavior. There's challenges with that too. I know with Ibogaine, there is increased cardiovascular risk. There's a lot of steps that the providers at Ambio Life Sciences take to ensure that it's safe. And when you get there, they're giving you IVs to make sure that you're hydrated. They're giving you a guidance on the foods that you should eat, or if you're taking any medications, when you need to get off of them so that the Ibogaine can be the most effective and you can have the most amount of time with that particular medicine. It comes down to agency and ownership. There's going to be a lot of challenges. And when I went into Ibogaine, I was told about all of them. There's a potential that you could die. And I thought, there's a potential that I'm going to die if I don't do this medicine. And so when I waited out, it was a chance that I was willing to take. And what made that decision so much easier was knowing that I was going to Ambio Life Science, and Trevor Miller and his team have done the due diligence to safeguard the space with proper protocols and procedures. Just like, listen, if I'm an athlete, I'm going to go to a wrestling camp. I want to know who the clinician is. I want to know what their background is. And because this space was so new, I had to learn that I had to bring those questions over to this space too.
So the U.S. federal classification of many psychedelics, pretty much almost all psychedelics, I believe, are still restricted. They're still considered Schedule 1. How do you view the current legal barriers toward research, access, and therapeutic use?
Well, how do I view them? I think it's laughable. I think that they're an unnecessary barrier to entry. But I also find the barriers in my mind, it's something that I'd like to talk about, right? So we have a barrier. How do you overcome that barrier? It's going to be through education, communication, advocacy, and exposure, experience. Like, how do we inform them? So there's groups that go on to Capitol Hill and they're meeting with legislators one-on-one. There's groups, and that's at the federal level. There's state efforts working to get psychedelics, including cannabis, legalized. So I live, I live in Colorado, where there's a tremendous effort to get psychedelics legalized, deregulated. They're working on changing some of those policies and procedures so that you can use them. You maybe can't buy them, but you can gift them. And so there's a couple of interesting workarounds. I also think that in Colorado, what's happening is that the indigenous community is saying these plant medicines are really special, and we need to make sure that we're administering them with the same sort of reverence that they deserve. I help out in North Carolina for the effort to get the psychedelic movement pushing forward. It's being led by a fabulous leader named Gina, who is eyes wide open and sees all things. And so there's people that are in each of these states that are doing that work. And really, Gina found me, and we have started a really fabulous relationship. I'm happy to support her. I always like supporting female business leaders as they're evolving. It's a lot of fun, and hopefully some of my lessons learned, I'll be like, don't do this, you'll get your ass kicked. Do it like this. And so it is fun for me to lean in and support Gina as she moves forward. But she's leading this charge to get psychedelics on the pathway to legalization. She put forward a House bill to support research and to create a task force and to get that ball rolling with the initial momentum needed. We're in a challenging time. You have a lot of forces that don't want to see this succeed for good and bad reasons. You've got people that have nefarious intent. You've got a lot of people that when they see things starting to happen with legislation, greed comes out, like an unhealthy greed. And it's really, I look at the landscape like, how do we make sure that we have the good hearts, the good people, the good energies pushing it forward? Because all of that is part of the ceremony of what helps with the healing when the citizens and the population do get the ability to participate here on US soil. And I think it is important to be able to make it so that it is legalized in the United States. All psychedelics, I would say all psychedelics should be legalized in the United States. No one should have to travel outside of the United States to get healing, especially when they're at their most vulnerable, where they're more likely to, if they were to encounter nefarious actors, um, it may not be a good outcome. You see embassies across this Latin America, South America saying, please don't come down here and do these psychedelics because it's starting to capture on to just bad actors. And so how do we keep those containers safe? For me, I'd much rather keep it in the United States where you have the legislative process to hold people accountable. You have standards that are getting implemented. I mean, as a sports and performance psychologist, if I have a conflict of interest, I have to disclose that at the beginning. Right? These are like basic things. You can go down and do some of these retreats and you don't know who you're with. You don't know if there's a conflict of interest until it comes out afterward. And you're like, you should definitely have told me that. And so I do want to keep it. I would like very much to see the United States legalize all psychedelics as we continue a path forward through healing. No one who's experienced trauma, whether it's big trauma like being abducted at the age of 5 or little trauma in the sense that you were playing and you hit your head and now you have a concussion, your brain doesn't work and you can't figure out why.
Yeah, we have, you mentioned North Carolina. I didn't realize that they were in the process of working toward maybe some level of legalization. States like Texas recently committed funds to Ibogaine research, which I think is pretty impressive. I think it was like 50 million for research there. What lessons or cautionary tales have you kind of seen in those state level initiatives?
When I was asked to support the North Carolina effort, one of the pieces that I made clear was that I didn't need to be up there uh, for me, but I would certainly be up there on behalf of veterans. So if there were veterans that wanted to speak because helping them tell their story was part of that healing journey, I deferred to them. And as I'm looking across this landscape, there is a lot of people who have uh, had healing through psychedelics that speaking and telling their story, it's very helpful. And we need to be able to create a community where those voices can get brought forward, especially voices that have historically been marginalized, invisible, without representation, because they're all reflective of the larger fabric and framework that makes up the United States of America. There's not one type of person that gets trauma. It is, if you are born and you walk one day on this earth, the chances of you experiencing trauma that you have to be able to reconcile, it's going to occur. And every day that you're on this earth, it's going to go up every day. And we as an American society, mind, body, spirit, but we forget about emotions. I didn't even know about emotions. And so there is this, need for conversation. There is a need for policy change, for reform. And it's going to happen because the voice of the affected individual, it's one of the most powerful voices on the planet. And the voices of veterans is very important. Having been at war for the last 20 years and being able to speak about that. Although I do think it's interesting, I watched 2 days ago, I went to downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. There was a documentary. It's called In Waves and War. And it showcases some Navy SEALs, what it was like when they had returned from a deployment before they went and did Ibogaine and then after Ibogaine. And someone in that documentary said a phrase that it has stuck with me. And they said, my trauma, what I thought was my trauma going in was not the trauma that I had when I came out. For me, it was childhood trauma. And one of the Navy SEALs said, if we didn't have broken children, would we even have a military?
Great point. Again, it's one of those, you leave me with statements that I don't know how to respond to because it's just too deep. And so How do you respond when you hear critics say, well, they're worried about psychedelic tourism or safety or misuse if access becomes broader? And you did address, there are some potential challenges with all that. But in your advocacy, how do you balance the urgency of healing for trauma victims with the need for a greater amount of scientific rigor, oversight, and ethical frameworks?
I look at the landscape like this. I think that psychedelic therapy should be available to anyone, full stop. Where, in my mind, where we have a bottleneck is with the amount of individuals, coaches, and therapists that are familiar enough to help those people after they've experienced the medicine come out the other side and make sense of it. My example, my particular journey is a great example where I couldn't have gone. I was going to regular Western medicine, but they didn't have experience with psychedelics, so they couldn't help me figure out how to unlock what was in there. And it really took me finding someone that did have that experience. So I'm going back in a couple weeks, and I'm going to go and talk to Dr. Chip Benoit, who is my advisor when I was at the University of Colorado Springs. So they have just built out the Resiliency Center, and there is now an arm of the Resiliency Center that is therapy for veterans. And I'm going to have a conversation with them about how are you going to be tying into the psychedelic movement, knowing the effectiveness of it? You guys, you have students coming through that want to become therapists. Psychedelics is getting legalized in Colorado Springs. They're working on even bringing Iboga into the scene, into the mix, along with psilocybin and MDMA and LSD. And how do we continue to build that bridge together? So for me, from my vantage point, it's looking at where are the needs in the community, expressing those needs to those populations, and figuring out how do we build bridges, build love connections towards that larger movement so that no one's floating out on an island. And there is this interwebbing that's starting to occur where the conversation is expanding. Of course, it's like building women's wrestling. We may not have enough coaches, we may not have enough officials, but once we realize that's the issue, we need to dive in there and figure out how do we cultivate those individuals. And so it's, for me, the way that I'm doing it is by using the networks and the connections that I have with those institutions, partnering and pairing them with the organizations that either know or don't know that they need it, and then continuing to usher it along.
So one of your core values is that no one who has faced any kind of trauma should be left behind.
I agree.
How do you envision equitable access to psychedelic therapies, especially for veterans, low-income communities, marginalized groups, or rural areas? I know, for psychedelic therapy here in Oregon, where you can get access to it, it's going to cost you several $1,000s for a single, really, therapy session. So what are your thoughts on this? How do you envision making it equitable for all?
The models that I've seen that are really exciting to me are the ones, it's the economy of health. And Sandy Griffin has a group that's in Colorado that's Pinnacle, right? It's cash for care. And I look at that and say, how have we been able to take our healthcare system that is broken, it's expensive, it is a barrier to entry for many, many individuals, and how did that get reformatted or rethought of so that it could become more accessible? And the vision of what they do is cash for care. And the models of what I'm doing in the psychedelic space is understanding that if, first off, I see sliding scale fees, so you pay what you can, but it's also by reducing those costs and creating a continuum of care, an economy of care, where you're starting to buy and reinvest. Historically, the Western model is you go, you spend money, that money gets put into profit, and it goes into someone's pocket. But in this economy of care, where you're now going to these places where your investment into that model, it helps to reinvest back into the community and continuing to offset it. And we have that, plus we also have the charitable contribution, right? You have nonprofits that are helping to support and subsidize, if not completely sponsor, individuals to come out, with the onus and the pledge of once that individual comes out the other side, what are you going to do to continue to propagate and drive forward? Like, what is going to be the gift that you unfold into this world? And I think every time I find other veterans that have gone through their experience and other trauma survivors that have gone through this experience, it does take time for you to get equalized, walking in the world with all of these new thoughts and feelings and emotions and freedom. And once you get there and you sort of get your steady state legs, then it's like, okay, now how can you be of service and how can you continue to give back? And what I've think is really exciting. I've invested into a couple companies, and for me, it's you're not investing in the company, you're investing in the CEO. And I'm more prone to invest into those healing warriors that are motivated and see where the challenges are, and they know how to overcome challenges. They've been doing it their whole life. And there is those pockets of people that are coming up that I don't need to build anything. It's already being built, but what they do need is investment. So how can I do that? I can support with my own capital, but I can also go out and help bring capital to those companies that are doing the right thing.
So how do you handle cultural, spiritual, and indigenous contexts around plant medicines so that we aren't repeating some of those extractive and colonial patterns that have come in the past?
The way that I handle it is that I recognize that I am a white woman that has been able to benefit from this plant medicine. I don't speak the language of plants. I barely speak the language of emotion. It's starting to come to me. And I defer my thinking to the experts. So there is individuals that I've met that are indigenous that have been speaking to plants for 9 generations. I got connected to individuals within the Bwiti tribe who shared with me their philosophy. And all I can do is regurgitate what the other experts have said. But my preference is making sure that those voices do come forward. And there is a business entity that's been created to model after the model of healing and the model of health. And one of the co-owners of the business is indigenous, and they are equal shareholder. They're equal in the decision making. They're equal in the power. It could have easily been the model of, hey, in the United States, we build companies and we use you for an hourly wage, but that wasn't the genuine thing to do. That person has all the knowledge, they have all the wisdom, they have all the experience, and this model would actually fail without them. And so I think for me, looking at the indigenous groups, it's like looking at athletes. Of course, you can have the NCAA, you can have the Olympic movement, but none of that matters if you don't have the athletes, and you can't have the athletes if you don't have the coach. The coaches are very important, and to me, the indigenous workers are the coaches, and they are either coaching these teams and these athletes and these survivors to live to their full potential, or they're dropping the ball. And the more times than not, from my own personal experience, it's when people don't realize how much institutional and generational knowledge comes from those indigenous voices, and we don't fully include them into the conversation. So what's happening in Colorado with the indigenous groups that are speaking out and saying that there needs to be an awareness put forward, I stand behind them and I clap and I agree, because what they can speak to is very different than me, and their voices are critical and necessary.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest fears with the movement towards increased psychedelic use is the loss of that connection to the earth, to the ancestral roots, and it becomes increasingly pharmacologicalized. Is that a word, pharmacologicalized? Pharmaceutical companies taking over and like, okay, we're just going to figure out the chemical here, and we're going to process, we're going to put it in pill form, and we're going to make billions of dollars off of it, and we're going to do like we kind of historically do in a commercial economy, where we're just going to make profit and not worry about caring for the plants themselves and the connection to that, if that makes any sense.
It does. There's actually been examples of that happening. I was listening. So Americans for Ibogaine, the CEO is Brian Hubbard, and he was sharing the example of when oxycodone started to run rampant, and there was clearly an issue with medication and opioids. There was an opioid epidemic, and there was a company that came in that had the answer, and it was Suboxone. It was the same company that actually was developing and selling opioids. And so they had the problem and they had the solution, and they were capitalizing on both. And for many individuals, the Suboxone was having such tremendous withdrawals that it was even more challenging than the opioids. So when the Texas Ibogaine Initiative got put forward, one of the things that Brian Hubbard was very intentional about was making sure that they were going to do a request for proposals towards those drug companies in the process, where they were going to honor and acknowledge and commit to working with the Ibogaine leaders and legislators and the Texas Ibogaine Initiative to make sure that they're creating a model that is truly built out of the goodwill and spirit of the people, and not just a reflection of how the Western model comes in and eats it up, and we corporatize it and we pharmacologize it, as you said. So there are people that think differently, and those voices are starting to come forward, and they're powerful, and they're surrounded by advisors and advocates. And really, I very much see myself, you were asking me, what do I think my role is at Americans for Ibogaine? It's to not only talk about the substance, but it's also to walk alongside the leader, Brian Hubbard, who I have full faith in, because he leads with such a good heart. He's very generous with his remarks. And you know, Jeff, you and I come from wrestling. The number one thing I learned the first year in wrestling as a CEO, as a leader in the sport, was that you don't take credit for anything, because all it does is put a target on your back, and you have to learn how to thank all the other people. And so when I get to listen to Brian Hubbard, that's one of the things that first captured me about the way he speaks. It's that he's always gracious and honors the people that have come before him, that have walked before him. He enrolls people, and we all are walking forward together in this beautiful movement.
So if you had a wish list for 2030, what would the psychedelic trauma healing landscape look like in the U.S.?
Good question. I would just say legalization. I would love to see more community centers across the nation be able to provide psychedelics as a way to building community, of healing community. I would love to see it be affordable so that there's no one that has a barrier to entry. I would also love to see post-healing community rehabilitation centers, so that if you come from a place of trauma, even addiction, right? Addiction is a mask for trauma. So if you're going to unwind your addiction, then you have to deal with the trauma. And when you come out of that, how do you keep your hands busy? How do you keep your mind busy so that you don't go back to those same thought patterns? And one of the things that I found to be effective was I went and worked on a farm because it kept me busy. I'm doing manual labor. I'm cutting trees, and I'm fixing fences, and it's getting my mind off of what it was ruminating on before, and it's helping me to just do things differently, and I'm able to create a different game plan. So I think we need those post-care facilities too, and for me, it took me a month, but potentially you need a lot more time, because depending on where these people are coming from and what trauma they're re-gifting back to the earth, they're going to need support.
So what are you personally focusing your energy on next within Americans for Ibogaine or beyond?
What I am personally focusing my energy on is being a leader of integrity that speaks the truth. That's a bit of a freedom for me. I didn't know how to speak my truth because I wasn't connected to my soul. And that meant that my truth was really subjective based on the emotions that I was feeling. And Jeff, if I'm angry at you, I think one way. If I am joyful with you, then I think another way. And now I have this constitution that I can rely on. And so I really, for me, it continues to be personal development. I look forward to all the opportunities to walk alongside the Americans for Ibogaine Initiative. I do think that Brian Hubbard is a fabulous leader. There's a fundraiser coming up October 18th. That's going to be in Chicago, Echoes of Courage. That's going to be fundraising to help send individuals to experience Ibogaine and get the healing that they are desperately seeking. And beyond that, I've gotten to a very cool place in life where I can take on a lot of side quests. Not many people would see being a sports diplomat as a side quest, but for me, that's one of them. That's a role that continues to evolve. And as that role continues to evolve, I'm able to pollinate those conversations with that I did Ibogaine, and it really helped me get to be at a place where I could sit across from leaders, senior leaders within the government and within other governments, and have intelligent conversations. I'm always thrilled about that. And I just want to keep letting life unfold and living life in a way that makes me feel good, where I'm happy and joyful. I recognize hard times are going to come. I've certainly had them. They're not going to stop. But what I can do now is chain wrestle through them versus letting it ankle pick me. I lay on my back and I scream at whatever ankle picked me instead of just being like, let's fix it.
I love the wrestling references there. And having seen what you have done with women's wrestling in this country, and I know you're not going to take much of the credit. You're going to say you walked alongside a lot of people, and indeed you did. But women's wrestling is in a beautiful place right now in this country. And I would largely attribute it to you. And I know you won't accept that attribution, but you played a tremendous role there. And so knowing what you have done for women's wrestling, I'm really excited for this next chapter in your life and what you're going to do for the many people who are broken and in pain right now that need the help that this therapy can bring, what you're going to do for those people. And so I'm really excited for that. But in the meantime, what can we do as listeners, as the viewers of this podcast, whether voters, caregivers, mental health professionals, or just curious citizens, do to support safe, ethical advancement of psychedelics for trauma healing?
A few things. One is you can go to Americans for Ibogaine, get educated, sign up to be on that email list. Two, continue to get educated in your community around the benefits of psychedelics. I mean, if we're talking about how do we tackle the homeless issue? How do we tackle drug addiction? How do we tackle all of these things that are starting to permeate every aspect of our life? It's going to be through intentional steps where we heal the wounds and we don't continue to mask it. And there is a way that psychedelics can be used to, at a very sweeping generalization, we could say it can heal our country. But at the most personal level, it's that we are all worthy of healing. It is that we are all deserving of being able to live a life where we are unchained from the scripts and the patterns of past lives and past generations. We should be able to walk through life with full agency, with being a fully sovereign human. So I would say my ask is of anyone that's listening is to dive into that space, because what you'll get on the other side, and it may not happen overnight. It may not happen in a month or a year. For me, it took a year and a half. I kept going and I kept slogging through. There is this freedom and the ability to take a deep breath. There's a lot of challenging things happening around us, and we get to decide, do I want to feel those emotions with everyone else, or am I going to be an observer to what's happening and figure out how do I wrap my arms around this situation and usher it to a different outcome?
So how can our listeners and viewers connect with you and learn more about Americans for Ibogaine?
Americans for Ibogaine, there's a website, Americans for Ibogaine. I'm sure you'll put that on the
link in.
Yep. There's social media, and there's going to be events that happen around the country. So please feel free to reach out. And if anyone wants to host a fundraiser, and that's the way that you get me to your house, I would love that. So please feel free to be like, I feel like this is something I can be a support for. I'm good at hosting parties. I'm good at bringing people together and convening them. So there's always that option too. And really, if there is an idea or an ingenious idea that you have, or you think maybe someone that can help move the needle in a significant way, you can always reach out to Americans for Ibogaine, and there's a crew there that are really passionate about making magic happen. For me personally, you can go to wrestlelikeagirl.org and follow along on our email list. I also have some social media accounts. If you're willing to sleuth through and find Sally Roberts Wins, you can find me on Instagram. I started to tone down my Instagram and my social media presence just because I needed to reclaim more me time. But I would love to have followers. I can't guarantee the content, so I apologize in advance for anything I do or do not say.
That's fine. So what final message or hope would you like to leave people who themselves are suffering or supporting someone through trauma?
The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And you may have felt like you have taken steps and it felt like you were spinning your wheels in the mud. I would encourage you, if you're listening to this podcast, there is an interest, sit and think if the medicine is calling to you. If it is, explore your options. There is no need to go dive into the ocean the way that I did. You can certainly take small microdosing steps, and you can continue to work with a therapist, or if you need to find a therapist. But what I want everyone to know is that there is very much an intention of healing in this country, and it's healing at the spiritual and soul level. There is a beautiful revival happening. It's a click, but the click is, it's not how much money you have. It is not how successful you've been. It's not how many Olympic gold medals you have or have not worn. The only prerequisite to entry is that you want to have to be a good person and you want to start walking on the journey. And for any of you that are out there and considering that this might be a journey you want to walk on, there's a lot of people standing in the parks and in these celestial places that are cheering you on. And so speak it into existence and it will happen.
And I'm just going to end on that note because I can't add anything to that. So Sally, thank you for coming on today. This has just been a wonderful adventure for me and has deepened my understanding. And I feel even more bonded to you after this conversation because I learned so much. So just thank you. Just keep doing what you're doing and keep aging well.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.